The cold December wind swept dry leaves along Fifth Avenue as Victoria Ashford came to an abrupt stop in front of the Tiffany & Co. window display. It wasn't the jewelry that caught her attention, but the impossible reflection in the glass. A boy sitting on the opposite side, folding paper with the precision of a surgeon. His small, dirty hands were transforming scraps of discarded newspaper into perfect burr. Each crease exit with a delicacy clashed brutally with the rags he wore. Victoria slowly turned around, her Louboutin heels echoing against the frozen concrete. The boy couldn't have been more than 12, but something about the way he moved made her forget entirely about the shareholders' meeting waiting for her at the top of the Chrysler building. He worked in silence, oblivious to the stream of executives and tourists who passed by him as if he were invisible. Every origami that took shape in his hand was placed carefully in a small cardboard box beside him, as though each piece were a precious treasure. Before we dive into this story, tell us in the comment, where are you watching? All right, enjoy the story. Victoria Ashford was not the kind of woman who stopped to watch beggar. At 35, she had built a real estate empire that stretched from Manhattan to the Connecticut suburb, turning every investment into gold. Her schedule was timed down to the second. Gym at 5 in the morning, office by 7, meetings until 9 at night. There was no room for distraction, much less for abandoned children on the streets of New York. But something about that boy rooted her to the spot. Maybe it was the way his hands moved, creating beauty out of garbage. Or maybe it was the fact that, for the first time in years, she had simply stopped walking. Victoria never stopped. Not since her mother's death 15 years earlier. She had become a machine of productivity, an unstoppable force devouring contracts and closing deals as though her life depended on it. The boy looked up for an instant, and Victoria felt something strange stir in her chest. His eyes were dark, as deep as well, but there was a light in couldn't decipher. He watched her for a few seconds, then returned to his work as if she were just another passing shadow in his world of paper dream. Victoria took a step forward, then another. She didn't know why she was approached, but her feet seemed to have a will of their own. The boy kept folding, now creating what looked like a butter. His hands were small but precise, each movement executed with a mastery Victoria had never seen. Where did you learn to do that? The question slipped from her lips. Before she could stop, the boy looked up again, but didn't answer. There was a shyness in his eye, but also a quiet dignity that caught her off guard. He simply continued his work, finishing the butterfly with one last delicate fold. Then, to Victoria's astonishment, he held the paper creation out. Victoria hesitated. Her hands, so steady when signing million-dollar contract, trembled slightly as she accepted the little gift. The butterfly was perfect, each wing symmetric, every detail carefully shaped. It was made from a page of the Wall Street Journal, and Victoria could see fragments of real estate market headlines printed across its delicate wing. "It's beautiful," she murmured, and for the first time in years, her voice sounded genuinely moved. The boy smiled, a small, radiant smile that lit up his dirty face. He pointed at the butterfly, then up at the sky, as if telling her it was meant to fly. Victoria followed his gesture, and for one absurd moment, she imagined the little paper creation taking flight over Manhattan's skies. When she lowered her eyes, the boy was watching her with an intensity that made her uneasy. It was as if he could see straight through her expensive clothes, past her mask of success, down to something she had buried a long time ago. Victoria felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to leave, to return to her controlled world of spreadsheets and boardroom. I have to go," she stammered, carefully placing the butterfly inside her Hermes purse. But as she turned to leave, something made her glance back. The boy had gone back to his fold, but now he was creating something different. Victoria couldn't quite make out what it was, but there was something familiar in the shape emerging from his hand, something that made her heart beat faster in a way she couldn't explain. The blare of a car horn snapped her back to reality. Her driver, Jane, had pulled the Bentley up to the corner and was discreetly waving. Victoria started walking toward the car. Her eyes stayed fixed on the boy until he vanished from sight. During the entire ride to the office, she held the paper butterfly, her fingers tracing its delicate fold. There was something about that encounter that unsettled her deep, as though a long locked door had cracked open, letting memories escape he had sworn never revisit. James watched her in the rearview mirror, noticing her faraway expression. In 15 years of working for Victoria, he had never seen her look so human, always cold, always calculating, always in control. But now there was something different in her eye, a vulnerability he didn't know how to interpret. "Miss Ashford," he said gently, "we've arrived." Victoria blinked, realizing they were parked in front of the towering glass and steel building that housed Ashford Properties head. She tucked the butterfly into her purse and stepped out of the car, but her movements felt mechanical, as if part of her mind was still standing on that cold side Fifth Avenue. The lobby bustled with activity. Employees hurried back and forth, phones rang non-stop, and the familiar scent of expensive coffee hung in the air. This was her kingdom, her absolute domain. But today, everything felt strangely distant, as if she were watching it all through frosted glass. Miss Ashford, Margaret, her personal assistant, appeared at her side with a stack of documents. The Henderson Corp shareholders are waiting in the conference room. The acquisition contract needs to be reviewed before the 2 o'clock meeting. Victoria nodded automatically, but her hands instinctively reached for the butterfly in her purse. The paper was soft under her finger, a texture completely unlike the rigid documents that ruled her life. For one crazy moment, she imagined what it would be like to fold contracts into birds, to turn spreadsheets into flowers, to create beauty out of the coldness of business. Miss Ashford, Margaret called again, worry clear in her voice. Are you all right? Victoria forced a professional smile. Of course, Margaret. Let's get started. But as she walked toward the elevator, she couldn't stop thinking about the boy and his magical hands that turned trash into art. There was something about that encounter that had awakened a part of herself she thought had died forever. And for the first time in 15 years, Victoria Ashford wondered if there might be something more to life than money and power. Before we dive into this story, tell us in the comments, where are you watching? All right? Enjoy the story. Here's the full English translation with a natural, fluid, emotionally faithful tone, adapted to American English. The meeting with the Henderson Corp shareholders was supposed to be just another triumph in Victoria Ashford's relentless career. The $42 million acquisition contract lay on the polished mahogany table, waiting only for her signature to turn yet another Manhattan block into a luxury comp. But Victoria couldn't focus on the words printed before her. Her fingers tapped nervously on the table as Robert Henderson, a burly man in his 60s, wearing a suit that cost more than most Americans earned in a year, outlined the final details of the deal. Beside him, 3 lawyers in identical suits were taking notes on every word, like vultures waiting to pick over the remains of another lucrative transaction. Miss Ashford, Henderson said, his voice booming across the 42nd floor conference. I believe we can wrap this up today. The property is clean. All the tenants have been appropriately relocated. The word relocated echoed strangely in Victoria's mind. For the first time, she wondered where those people had actually gone. In 15 years of business, she had displaced hundreds of families, always justifying her actions with the cold logic of urban progress. But today, the image of the boy with the origami wouldn't leave her head. Where did he sleep at night? Did he have a family? A home? Miss Ashford, Henderson repeated, holding out a gold Mont Blanc pen to her. Is there a problem? Victoria took the pen, but her hand trembled ever so slightly. The weight of it felt heavier than usual, as if it carried the burden of all the lives that signature would change. She looked down at the contract, but the letters seemed blurred, replaced by the image of small hands folding paper with surgical precision. I need a moment, she murmured, rising abruptly from her chair. The men in the room exchanged puzzled looks. Victoria Ashford never hesitated. She was famous for her decisive, her ability to close deals without blinking. Margaret, who was standing to the side, frowned in concern. Victoria walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window that offered a spectacular view of Manhattan. Down below, people looked like ants moving along the avenue, each carrying their own story, their own dream. For the first time, she wondered how many of those lives she had altered with her business decision. Her phone buzzed. A message from James. Miss Ashford, the boy is still there. Thought you'd want to know. Her heart skipped a beat. Why had James sent that message? She had never shown any interest in people on the street before, but somehow her driver had sensed that this encounter was different. Miss Ashford, Henderson called out, impatient creeping into his tone. We have other appointments today. Victoria turned, but instead of returning to the table, she walked toward the door. Margaret, cancel my afternoon appointments. But Miss Ashford, Margaret protested, the meeting with the Japanese investors is at 4. They flew in from Tokyo just to cancel, Victoria repeated, her voice firmer now. Reschedule every. Henderson stood up, clearly irritated. Miss Ashford, this contract is time-sensitive. If we don't sign today, the contract can wait until tomorrow. Victoria interrupted, surprising herself with her own audacity. In 15 years, she had never postponed a deal for personal reasons. She left the room. Behind her, a group of stunned men and an utterly bewildered assistant. In the elevator, Victoria pressed the lobby button with a sense of urgency she couldn't explain. There was something about that boy that was calling her back, as if he held answers to questions she hadn't even known she was asked. The lobby was even busier than it had been that morning, but Victoria crossed as if in a trance. James was waiting outside, holding the Bentley's door open. 5th Avenue, James. Quickly. On the drive over, Victoria pulled the paper butterfly out of her purse and examined it more carefully. The folds were perfect, every angle calculated with mathematical precision. There was something else she hadn't noticed before. In the center of one of the wings, written in almost faded pencil, was a single word, hope. Her heart stopped for a moment. That word had been written by her mother Eleanor Ashford, in a letter Victoria had kept locked away for 15 years. A letter she had never managed to read all the way through because she always grew too emotional before she reached the end. How is this possible? She whispered to herself. James glanced at her in the rear view. I'm sorry, Miss Ashford. Nothing, James. Just keep driving. When they arrived on Fifth Avenue, Victoria stepped out of the car before James could open the door. The boy was still there, sitting in the same spot. Now a small crowd had gathered around. Tourists were taking pictures of his origami. Some people had dropped coins into his cardboard box, and an elderly woman was chatting with him in Spanish. Victoria walked close, observing the scene. The boy answered the woman with gentle gestures, his eyes bright with a genuine joy that was a stark contrast to his ragged clothes. When the woman moved on, he returned to his work, but this time he was creating something different. Victoria stepped nearer and saw that he was folding a robe, but it wasn't an ordinary robe. The petals were made from pages of an old book, and she could see fragments of text in antique English. When the boy finished, he looked up and saw her. This time he smiled immediately, as if he'd been waiting. He held the paper rose out, and Victoria accepted it with trembling. Scent of the old paper drifted up to her, bringing memory had buried long ago. Where did you get this book? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The boy pointed to a stack of old books beside his cardboard box. Victoria knelt down, something she had never done in public, and examined. They were worn volumes, some bound in cracked leather, others with yellowed pages. And then she saw something that made her whole world stop. In the middle of the pile was a copy of Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, with a dedication on the first page, to my dear Victoria, who will one day find her own Mr. Darcy. With love, Mom. It was the book her mother had given her on her 16th birthday, the book that had disappeared mysteriously after the funeral, the book she had searched for desperately for months because it was one of the last tangible memories she had of Eleanor. Victoria picked it up with shaking hand, her tears smudging the ink of the inscription. How did you get? The boy watched her with his deep, steady eye, then pointed to himself and made a gesture as if hugging something precious. Then he picked up a scrap of paper and began writing with a worn-down pencil. His handwriting was careful, each letter drawn with quiet intent. A lady left a box of books at the shelter before she left. She said they were for someone special who would come for them someday. Victoria read the words once, twice, 3 times before their full meaning sank in. Her mother had donated the books to a shelter before she died. She had left a message, a trail of breadcrumbs leading back to the lost treasures of her child. Which shelter? She asked, her voice cracking with emotion. The boy wrote again. St. Mary's on 42nd. I stay there sometime. Victoria knew St. Mary. It was one of the oldest shelters in Manhattan, always struggling for funding, always on the verge of closing. She had received dozens of donation requests over the year and ignored them all in favor of more profitable investments. How long have you had these books? She asked. 3 years, he wrote, since I came to the shelter. Victoria did the math quick. 3 years ago, she'd been at the pinnacle of her career, closing the biggest deal of her life, the acquisition of an office complex that officially made her one of the wealthiest women in New York. While she was celebrating her success with French champagne, this boy had been discovering the literary treasures her mother had left behind. Why do you use the books to make origami? She asked. The boy thought for a moment, then wrote, the words are prettier when they become birds. That way, they can fly and touch other people. The simplicity and depth of his answer left Victoria speechless. This boy, who had nothing but tattered clothes and a cardboard box, had found a way to turn literature into art, to breathe new life into the words her mother had cherished. Victoria looked around and realized a small crowd had gathered. People stopped to admire his origami. Some left money, others simply marveled at the beauty of it all. The boy had created a little oasis of art and wonder in the middle of Manhattan's chaos. What's your name? She asked soft. The boy hesitated, then wrote, people call me Pape because of the origami. Pape, not a real name, but an alias that reflected his craft. Victoria wondered what his true name, what story had brought a child so young to the streets of New York. Paper, she repeated, tasting the word on her tongue. Would you like to have lunch with? The boy looked up, startled. It was obvious that no one had ever offered him anything like. He glanced down at his dirty clothes, then up at Victoria's immaculate suit, as if measuring the distance between their worlds. Victoria noticed his hesitation. There's a cafe on the corner, said Jen. Nothing too formal. I'd just like to talk to you a little more. Paper nodded slowly, beginning to pack up his origami into the cardboard box. Victoria helped, touching each creation with reverence. They were true works of art, born from the imagination of a child who had transformed abandonment into beauty. As they walked side by side down Fifth Avenue, the most powerful woman and a street boy who made magic out of paper, Victoria felt something she hadn't felt in 15 years. The sense that maybe for once, she was exactly where she was meant to be. Here's the full English translation, preserving the emotional tone and natural flow for an American audience. The little cafe on the corner of 5th Avenue and 57th was one of those places Victoria walked past every day without ever really seeing. Cafe Luna was written in faded letters across the window, and the interior had that worn-in charm of a family-run establishment stubbornly resisting Manhattan's gentrification. The smell of freshly roasted coffee and homemade bread wrapped around Victoria as she pushed open the door, the old brass bell announcing her arrival. Paper hesitated in the door, his eyes scanning the room with the caution of someone who wasn't used to being welcome indoors. His torn clothes stood in stark contrast to the usual paper. Executives on their lunch, tourists with cameras slung around their necks, art students hunched over small tables with open lap. "Come on," Victoria said softly, touching his shoulder light. "Let's sit back there." She chose a quiet table near the window, where the natural light fell gently across the boy's face. As they sat down, Victoria noticed how Paper kept his box of origami close, as if it were his most precious possession. And maybe it was. Maria, the cafe's owner, sturdy Dominican woman, graying hair pulled into a neat bun, walked over with a warm smile. Her eyes softened when she saw Paper, and Victoria realized this wasn't the first time the boy had been there. "Hola, Paper," Maria greeted him fondly. "Cómo estás, mi niño?" Paper gave her a shy smile and waved. Victoria watched their exchange. Fascinating. There was a familiarity, a genuine human connection she rarely witnessed in her corporate world. "He comes in sometimes," Maria explained to Victoria. "When it's too cold outside, I let him warm up in here. He's a good boy, very polite." Victoria felt something tight chest. This woman, who probably earned in a month what Victoria spent on a single dinner, had opened her heart and her cafe to a child with nowhere else to go, while she, with all her million, had never even noticed Paper exist until that morning. "What can I get you to?" Maria, pulling a creased notepad from her apron pocket. Victoria looked at Pape, who was studying the menu with an almost painful concentration. She realized he was reading each item carefully, probably calculating the prices in his head. "Order anything you want," Victoria told him gently. "Anything at all." Paper lifted his eye. Surprise, after a moment's hesitation, pointed to a ham and cheese sandwich, one of the cheapest things on the menu. Victoria felt her heart crack a little more. "Bring us 2 full sandwiches," she said to Marie, "with fries and 2 hot chocolates." And she paused, then added, "Also a slice of that chocolate cake in the case." Maria nodded approvingly and walked away. Paper watched Victoria with a look that was equal parts gratitude and confusion, as if he couldn't quite understand why a stranger was being so kind. "Paper," Victoria began, her fingers nervously twisting the strap of her hand. "Can you tell me how you ended up in New York?" The boy picked up a napkin and began to write with his worn-down pen. His handwriting was careful, every letter formed with quiet precision. "I came from Texas with my grandma 4 years ago. She got sick and died in the hospital. We didn't have anyone else." Victoria read the words twice, feeling a knot form in her throat. 4 years. Paper had been only 8 when he lost the last person he could call family, the same age she had been when her father died, leaving just her and her mother behind. "And since then, you've been staying at St. Mary's Shelter?" she asked soft. Paper shook his head and wrote again. "Sometimes, when there's space. Other times, I sleep outside or in other shelters. St. Mary's is always full." Victoria knew the statistics about homeless children in New York, but she had never stopped to think about what those numbers meant in human terms. Every statistic was a child like Paper, trying to survive in a city that had no place. Maria brought their food, and Victoria watched Paper with a hunger that went beyond the physical. It was as though he were soaking up not just the meal, but the warmth, the feeling of sitting at a table like a normal person, not an invisible figure on the sidewalk. "How did you learn to make origami?" Victoria asked, nibbling at her sandwich without much appetite. Paper wiped his hands on a napkin before writing, "My grandma taught. She said when you fold paper, you put your soul in the fold. Each origami carries a piece of who you are." The depth of the answer took Victoria by surprise. There was a wisdom in those words, far outstripped his 12 years. His grandmother had given him more than a craft. She'd given him a philosophy, a way to turn pain into beauty. "She must have been a very special woman," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. Paper nodded vigorously, his eyes shining. He picked up a clean napkin and began folding it with swift, sure movements. In a few minutes, he had shaped a small paper flower, delicate and perfect. "For you," he said, speaking for the first time since they'd met. His voice was soft, almost a whisper, but full of sincerity. Victoria accepted the flower with trembling hands. It was the second creation he'd given her, and she realized she was starting to build a little collection of paper treasures that meant more to her than any jewel she owned. "Paper," she said, carefully placing the flower in her purse beside the butter and the rose. "Can I ask you something personal?" He nodded, his wide, attentive eyes fixed on her face. "Have you ever thought about having a family again? A real home?" Paper lowered his eyes, and Victoria saw a shadow of sadness cross his face. He wrote slowly, "Sometimes I dream about, but families want perfect kids, not street kids who make origami out of trash." The brutal honesty of his answer hit Victoria like a punch. This child, barely 12 years old, had already absorbed the cruel reality that the world saw him as disposable. She thought of all the times she had walked past kids like him without seeing, treating them like part of the city's scenery instead of human being. Hope fears. "That's not true," she said, her voice firmer than she intended. You are extraordinary. Your talent, your kindness, your strength. Any family would be lucky to have you." Paper looked up, startled by the conviction in her voice. For a moment, they just looked at each other in silence, and Victoria felt something shift inside, a connection that went beyond sympathy or charity. It was something deep, more prime, a protective instinct she hadn't known she possessed. "Do you have dreams?" she asked. "Things you'd like to do when you grow up?" Paper smiled for the first time since they'd started talking about his life. He wrote quick, "I want to have an origami studio, teach other kids like my grandma taught, show that you can create beauty even when everything looks ugly." Victoria felt tears prick her eye. Here was a child who had lost everything, who slept on the streets and ate when he could, still dreamed of giving something back to the world. He still believed in the power of art and education to change lives. "And you?" Paper wrote, turning the question back on her. "What's your dream?" The question caught her completely off guard. When was the last time anyone had asked her about her dream? In her corporate world, people asked about targets, goal, growth strat, but dreams were luxuries she had abandoned long ago. I don't know," she admitted, realizing how pathetic it sounded. "I think I stopped dreaming a long time ago." Paper studied her thought, then wrote, "My grandma said it's never too late to start dreaming. She said dreams are like origami. Sometimes they get crumpled, but you can always unfold them and start over." The simple wisdom in those words struck Victoria like light. When had she become so cynical, so focused on material success that she'd forgotten what really mattered? When had she traded dreams for spreadsheets, hope for contracts? Maria approached with the check, but Victoria gestured for her to wait. She wasn't ready for this moment to end. For the first time in years, she was having a real, honest conversation with someone who didn't want anything from her but her Paper, she said, making a decision that surprised even herself. "Would you like to see where I work? Maybe we can find a way for you to keep making your origami somewhere safe." His eyes lit up, then filled with caution. "You don't have to do that for me," he wrote. "I can take care of myself." "I know you can," Victoria replied, gently touching his small hand. "But sometimes we all need help, and I think I need your help too." "My help?" he wrote. Confused, Victoria smiled, feeling something warm bloom in her chest. "You reminded me of something I'd forgotten. You reminded me that I can still dream." Paper smiled, a radiant smile that lit up the whole cafe. And in that moment, Victoria knew her life had changed forever. She didn't yet know how or what she would do about it, but she knew she couldn't go back to her old life and pretend this meeting had never happened. They finished their meal in a comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Victoria watched Paper fold naps into tiny birds, creating a little flock across the table. And for the first time in 15 years, she allowed herself to imagine what it might feel like to have a family. The Ashford Properties building rose like a monolith of glass and steel against the grey December sky, its 45 stories reflecting the heavy clouds that threatened snow. Victoria watched Paper lift his gaze to take in the imposing structure, his expression a mix of awe and intimidation. To him, this place must have looked like a castle from a fairy tale, unreachable, belonging to a world entirely different from his own. "It's so tall," Paper murmured, his voice almost lost in the noise of Madison Avenue traffic. Victoria smiled, remembering her own reaction the first time she'd seen the building, still under construction 15 years ago. Back then, she had been just an ambitious young broker with an impossible dream of building a real estate empire. Now she owned it all, but strangely, the achievement felt less impressive when she saw it through Paper's eye. "Let's go up," she said, guiding him through the polished brass revolving door. The lobby buzzed with its usual mid-afternoon energy. Executives in expensive suits clustered in conversation. Assistants hurried past, carrying stacks of documents, and the constant ring of phone created a familiar urban symphony. But today, Victoria saw it all from a different perspective. Through Paper's eye, this world looked cold, impersonal, almost hostile. People stared at Paper with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. His tattered clothes and unkempt appearance clashed brutally with the polish surrounding. Victoria felt a surge of protective anger rise in her chest. How dare dare they judge this extraordinary child based only on how he looked? Miss Ashford! Margaret appeared in a whirlwind of efficiency, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. Thank God you're back. A Japanese investor furious about the cancellation. Henderson is threatening to pull the offer, and there's a stack of urgent contracts waiting for your signature. Margaret stopped short when she noticed paper at Victoria's side, her eyes wide, sweeping over him with an expression that mixed shock and poorly disguised disapproval. Margaret, Victoria said, her voice taking on a tone that brooked no argument. This is paper. He'll be my guest this afternoon. Your guest? Margaret stammered, clearly struggling to process the situation. In 15 years working for Victoria, she had never seen her boss bring anyone from outside the corporate world into the office, least of all, a homeless child. Yes, Victoria confirmed, placing a protective hand on Paper's shoulder. Prepare the small conference. We'll need privacy. Margaret nodded mechanically, but Victoria could see the wheels turning behind her eye. By the end of the day, the entire company would be buzzing about the mysterious child Victoria had brought to the office. They stepped into the private elevator that led straight to Victoria's office on the 45th floor. Paper watched the numbers climb on the digital panel, his eyes shining with childlike wonder. When the doors opened to reveal Victoria's panoramic office, he let out a soft gasp of amazement. The office was a corporate success. Glass walls offered a 360-degree view of Manhattan. Italian designer furniture filled the space with minimalist elegance, and awards and certificates lined an entire wall. But what caught Paper's attention most was Victoria's desk. Flawless surf, polished mahogany, empty except for a closed lap and a phone. Where are your origami? Paper asked, his voice echoing in the spacious room. The question caught Victoria completely off guard. My what? Your origami? Paper repeated, walking to the desk and brushing his hand over its smooth surface. Your creation. The things you make when you're sad or happy or when you miss. Victoria realized he was asking about her hobbies, her passions, the things that made her soul come alive. And the terrible truth was that she didn't have any. Her life had become so consumed by work that she had forgotten how to create, how to play, how simply to be. I don't make origami, she admitted, feeling an unexpected wave of shame. Paper looked at her, genuinely confused. Then what do you do when you need to put your soul somewhere? The question hit her like a slap. When was the last time she had put her soul into anything? When had she created something just for the joy of, not for profit or recognition? Before she could answer, the office door burst open. Robert Henderson stormed in, his face red with rage, trailed by Margaret, who was frantically trying to stop. Victoria! Henderson thundered. What the hell was that this morning? You left me sitting in the conference room like an idiot. He stopped abruptly when he saw Paper, his eyes narrowing in disgust. What is this? Why is there a child in your office? Victoria felt her blood boil. The way Henderson said child, like it was something filth, something unworthy, sparked a protective fury she hadn't known she possessed. Henderson, she said, her voice dangerously calm. This is Paper, and you will treat him with respect, or you can leave my office right now. Henderson let out a harsh, ugly laugh. Respect? Victoria, have you lost your mind? This street kid doesn't belong. This is a place of business, not a charity shelter. Paper flinched instinct, his eyes filling with a hurt that was all too familiar. Victoria realized he'd heard words like these before. He'd been rejected and humiliated by adults who only saw him as a burden. Get out. Victoria, her voice like a blade. What? Henderson blinked, stunned. I said get out of my office now. Victoria, be reasonable. We have a $42 million deal. The deal is off, Victoria interrupted, shocking even herself. I won't do business with someone who treats a child with contempt. Henderson's jaw dropped. You're canceling a $42 million contract over a street kid? I'm canceling because you just showed me exactly who you are, Victoria replied, crossing the room and opening the door. And I don't like what I see. Henderson stormed out, muttering threats about lawsuits and consequences. Margaret trailed after, shooting Victoria a worried look. When the door closed, silence filled the room. Paper stood near the window, staring out over the city. His shoulders were slumped, and she could see he was fighting tears. Paper, she said soft, approaching, shouldn't have come, he murmured. Ruined your important deal. That man was right. I don't belong here. Victoria felt her heart break. No, she said firmly, kneeling so she could look him in the eye. You didn't ruin anything. Henderson was wrong, completely wrong, but you lost so much money because of me. Money? Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. Paper, I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. Do you know what I didn't have until today? I didn't have a real friend. I didn't have anyone to remind me what actually mattered. Paper lifted his eyes, surprised. I'm your friend? If you'll have, Victoria said, tears filling her eyes. I know I'm just some rich stranger you met today, but you changed something in me, Paper. You reminded me of who I was before I got lost in all this. Paper studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he pulled a piece of paper from his pocket. It was a page page torn from one of her mother's books, and he began to fold it carefully. Victoria walked, transfixed, as his small hands shaped it into something new. When he finished, he held out a tiny paper heart, perfect in its simplicity. "For you," he said, "to remind you that you have a big heart, even when other people can't see it." Victoria took the heart with trembling hand, feeling the weight deep in her chest. It was made from a page of Pride and Prejudice, and she could see fragments of Jane Austen's words in the delicate folds. "Thank you," she whispered, pressing it to her heart. Just then, Margaret knocked and stepped inside hesitant. "Miss Ashford," she said, her voice tense, "I have to tell you, Henderson didn't leave. He's in the lobby with 2 attorneys, and he's threatening to sue for breach of contract. And there are reporters arriving. Someone leaked the story about you cancelling the deal." Victoria closed her eye, feeling the weight of her impulsive choice. She'd spent 15 years building her reputation. Now she was risking it all for a child she'd only just met. But when she looked at Paper, she saw something in his eyes that steadied admiration, gratitude, and something more. It was unconditional love, the kind she hadn't felt since her mother died. If you believe love can change lives and that every child deserves a chance, subscribe to the channel and share this story, because sometimes one small act of kindness can change everything. "Margaret," Victoria said, her voice clear and resolute, "cancel all my appointments for the rest of the week and call my personal attorney. Henderson wants a fight. He'll get." Paper looked up at her in wonder. "You're going to fight for me?" Victoria smiled, feeling a strength she hadn't felt in years. "I'm going to fight for both, because some things are more important than money, and you helped me remember that." The media firestorm that descended on Victoria Ashford over the next 48 hours was unlike anything she had experienced in her career. The headlines in the financial papers screamed corporate betrayal, mental instability, and the collapse of an empire. "Millionaire walks away from multi-million-dollar deal" for Street Child blared across the front page of the Wall Street Journal. The New York Times ran an editorial questioning her fitness for leadership, while social media seethed with speculation about her sanity. Victoria sat in her office at 6 a.m. on a freezing Thursday, watching the sunrise paint Manhattan in shades of gold through the panoramic window. Stacks of newspapers covered her desk, each one telling a different version of the same story: the spectacular down of one of New York's most powerful women. But what unsettled her most wasn't the sensational headlines or the scathing analyses of her decision. It was the deafening silence of her phone. In just 2 days, she had lost 3 major investors, 2 important contracts had been cancelled, and her own board of directors had called an emergency meeting to discuss her behavioral instability. Margaret had been coming in and out of the office with increasingly worried expressions, bringing damage reports that seemed to grow by the hour. But what truly broke Victoria's heart was that Paper had disappeared. After the confrontation with Henderson, she had taken the boy back to St. Mary, promising she would return the next day to talk about his future. But when she arrived at the shelter on Wednesday morning, Sister Catherine, a kind 60-year-old woman who ran the place, told her that Paper had left during the night, taking only his box of origami. "He does that sometimes," Sister Catherine explained sadly. "When he feels like he's caused trouble for someone, he just vanishes. It's as if he carries the weight of the world on those small shoulders." Victoria had spent all of yesterday combing the streets of Manhattan, searching for Paper in every place street kids tended to hide: parks, subway stations, dark alley, under bridges. She had scoured every corner of the city. Paper had turned into a ghost, disappearing into the vast urban sprawl as if he'd never existed. The office door opened, and Margaret came in carrying a tray of coffee and wearing that grim expression Victoria had learned to dread these last few days. "The news isn't good," Margaret said, setting the tray on the desk and moving aside the paper. "Hartwell Corporation has officially withdrawn their partnership proposal. They said they can't align themselves with a company that has unstable leadership. And there's more." Victoria raised a hand to stop her. How many? How many what, Miss Ashford? How many investors have we lost? How many contracts have been cancelled? How much money have we lost? Margaret hesitated, consulting her clipboard. "So far, about $85 million cancelled contracts. 12 major investors have pulled out, and the board is meeting this afternoon to discuss a vote of no confidence." Victoria nodded calm, as if Margaret were reading her the weather. "And Paper? Any news about Paper?" "Miss Ashford," Margaret said, her voice taking on an almost pleading tone, "with all due respect, maybe it's time to focus on the real problems facing this company. That boy, well, he clearly doesn't want to be found, and you have an empire to save." Victoria rose slowly and walked over to the window that offered a sweeping view of the city. Down below, New York pulsed with its usual energy, people rushing to work, taxis honking in traffic, the familiar dance of urban life. Somewhere in that concrete maze, Paper was alone, probably blaming himself for the storm that had had swallowed her life. "Margaret," Victoria said without turning around. "Do you have children?" The question caught Margaret off guard. Yes, two. A 15-year-old boy and a 12-year-old girl. And if one of them were lost on the streets of New York, cold, hungry, blaming themselves for something that wasn't their fault, which would be more important to your job or finding? Margaret was silent for a long moment. "My children," she admitted at last. "Always my children." Victoria turned around, and Margaret was startled to see tears in her boss's eye. In 15 years working, she had never seen Victoria cry. "Then you understand," Victoria said softly. "Paper may not be my biological child, but in 2 days, he's become more important to me than all those contracts and investors combined." "But Miss Ashford," Margaret protested, "you built all this. It's your life, your legacy." "My legacy?" Victoria laughed, but the sound was tinged with bitterness. "Margaret, when I die, what will people remember me? That I built pretty buildings, that I hoarded millions of dollars, or that once, when it truly mattered, I chose an abandoned child over profit?" Margaret didn't know how to respond. She had worked for Victoria so long, she'd almost forgotten her boss was, above all, human being with a heart and a soul. The phone rang, interrupting the moment. Margaret answered, her expression tightening more every second. "It was the lawyer," she said when she hung up. "Henderson is filing a lawsuit for breach of contract and emotional damage. He's demanding $100 million in compensation." Victoria nodded as if she'd been expecting. "And the board meeting?" 3 o'clock. "They're voting on whether to keep you on as CEO or to ask for your resignation." Victoria looked at the clock. It was 8:30 in the morning. In 6.5 hours, she might lose everything she'd built over 15 years. Her empire, her reputation, her identity. It could all vanish with a single vote. She walked back to her desk and opened the top drawer, pulling out the 3 origami pieces Paper had given: the butterfly, the rose, and the heart. Each one was a miniature work of art, crafted with love and offered with a generosity only a child nothing could give. "Margaret," she said, her voice taking on a determination she hadn't felt in days, "cancel the board meeting." "Cancel? But Miss Ashford, you can't just..." "I can, and I will. If they want to take this company from me, they can do it without me there. I have more important things to..." Margaret looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "More important than saving your company?" Victoria smiled, and for the first time in days, it was a real smile. "Much more important. I'm going to find Paper, but you've already searched the entire city. Then I'll search it again and again until I find it." Victoria put on her coat and started for the door. Margaret stepped into her path. "Miss Ash, please, be reasonable. You're throwing away 15 years of work for a child you've only known for 3 days. Victoria stopped and turned to face her. "Margaret, can I ask you something? When was the last time you saw me truly happy? Not satisfied with a successful deal? Not proud of a lucrative acquisition? Genuinely happy?" Margaret opened her mouth to answer, then closed, realized couldn't remember. "I'll tell you when it was," Victoria continued. "It was Tuesday afternoon, Cafe Luna, talking with Paper about dreams and origami. For the first time in 15 years, I felt truly alive. And if losing all this is the price I have to pay to hold on to that feeling, it's a price I'm willing to pay." She walked out, leaving Margaret alone with piles of newspapers and damage reports. In the elevator, Victoria caught her reflection in the polished mirror and saw something hadn't seen in years. Determination fueled by love, not ambition. When the doors opened onto the lobby, she was met by a small throng of journalists who had gathered outside the building. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust toward her, and a cacophony of questions erupt. "Miss Ash, is it true you're having a nervous breakdown? Did you really walk away from a $40 million deal for a street child? How do you respond to accusations that you've lost your ability to lead?" Victoria paused in the middle of the crowd, looking at the anxious faces of the reporters. For a moment, she considered holding a press, explaining herself, trying to salvage her reputation. Then she thought of Paper, alone somewhere in the city, and realized she didn't care one bit what these strangers thought. "No comment," she said simply, pushing through the crowd toward her car. As James drove through Manhattan streets, Victoria looked out the window at the city that had been her battleground for so many years. Every building held a story of ambition. Every corner echoed memories of deals closed and contracts signed. But now, all of it felt hollow compared to the memory of a little boy turning scraps into beauty with his magical hand. "Where to, Miss Ashford?" James asked. Victoria thought for a moment, then smiled. "To St. Mary's, and then to every place a scared child might hide. We're going to find our boy." Snow had started to fall over New York when Victoria finally found Paper. It wasn't in any of the obvious places she had searched for 3 days. Not in the shelter, not in the parks, not in the warm subway. She found him in the last place she would have thought to look. Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx, sitting in front of a simple gray granite headstone. His small hands blue from the cold as he folded pieces of paper the the wind carried off as soon as he finished. Victoria had come here following nothing but a desperate hunt. After scouring Manhattan with no luck, she remembered Paper's words about his grandma, the woman who had taught him the art of origami. If he was feeling lost and guilty, maybe he had gone to the only place where he still felt connected to someone who had loved him unconditionally. She approached slowly, her footsteps muffled by the fresh snow covering the cemetery paths. Paper didn't see her coming. He was completely absorbed in his creation, folding what looked like a paper angel. His clothes were soaked through, his lips purple from the cold, and Victoria could see he was shivering violently. Paper! She called gently. The boy flinched, turning quick. When he saw her, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and guilt that shattered Victoria's heart. He tried to stand, but his legs were so numb he nearly collapsed. Victoria ran to him, pulling off her own coat and wrapping it around his narrow shoulder. "Oh God, Paper, you're freezing. How long have you been here?" "Since yesterday," he murmured, his teeth chattering so badly he could barely speak. I didn't know where else to go." Victoria pulled him into her arms, feeling how his small body trembled against hers. "Why did you run away? I've been searching the whole city." Paper lowered his eyes, tears mingling with the snowflakes falling across his face. "I saw the newspapers," he whispered. "I saw what happened because of me. You lost everything because of me." "Paper, look at," Victoria said, lifting his chin so their eyes met. "Nothing that happened was your fault. Nothing. That man said I didn't belong in your world, and he was right. I ruined your life." Victoria felt that same familiar anger rise in her chest, but this time it was directed at herself. How had she allowed a 12-year-old boy to carry the burden of her adult choice? "Paper," she said, her voice steady but soft. "Can I tell you a story?" The boy nodded, still shivering in her arms. 15 years ago, when my mother died, I thought the only way to honor her memory was to become rich and powerful. I worked day and night, built an empire, amassed millions of dollars. But you know what I found out? I had turned into someone my mother wouldn't even recognize. Cold, calculate, without compassion. Victoria paused, glancing at the headstone Paper had been sitting in front of. Rosa Martinez, 1945-2021. Loving grandmother and art. The words etched in the granite told a story of love and creativity that echoed in Paper's soul. "Was your grandma an artist?" Victoria asked. Paper nodded, a small smile flickering over his blue lips. "She painted beautiful pictures of flowers and birds. She said art was the language of the soul, that when you make something beautiful, you leave a piece of yourself in the world." Victoria felt hot tears rolling down her cheeks. She was right. You inherited that gift from her. You can create beauty out of nothing. You touch people's hearts with those small hands. "But I caused you so much trouble." "No," Victoria interrupted, her voice taking on an intensity that surprised them both. You saved me from becoming a monster. You reminded me who I really am underneath all these expensive suits and corporate titles." Paper looked at her, bewildered. "I saved you?" Victoria smiled, wiping her tears away. "When was the last time you heard of anyone walking away from $85 million for a child?" "Never," Paper admitted. "Exactly, because that's not something ordinary people do. But do you know why I did it? Because for the first time in 15 years, I remembered what actually matters. Not money, not buildings or contracts, human connection, love, choosing to do what's right, no matter what it costs." Paper was quiet for a long moment, taking in her words. "So you're not mad at me?" "Mad?" Victoria laughed, a warm, genuine sound that echoed through the silent cemetery. "Paper, I'm grateful to you, more grateful than I can ever say. But your company, my company will survive or it won't. But do you know what wouldn't have survived? My soul, if I'd chosen money over you." At that moment, Victoria's phone. It was Margaret, and her voice was tight with urgency. "Miss Ashford, where are you? The board meeting ended an hour ago. They voted to keep you on as CEO." Victoria blinked in surprise. "What? How?" "It was Mr. Thompson, the oldest investor. He gave a speech about integrity and human value. He said a leader who chooses principle over profit is exactly the kind of person he wants in charge of his investments." The others agreed. Victoria looked over at Paper, who was listening, wide-eyed. "And there's more," Margaret went on. "The story is everywhere now, not just the negative parts. The real story about you choosing to help an abandoned child. We're getting calls from investors around the world who want to work. They say they want to be part of a company with real value." Victoria ended the call stunned. "Paper," she said slowly, "it looks like you didn't just save my soul. You saved my company too." Paper smiled, the first true smile she'd seen on his face since she'd found it. "How?" "By showing the world that there are still people willing to do the right thing, no matter the cost." They sat together for a few more minutes, watching the snow settle over the quiet heads. Victoria thought of her mother, buried in a cemetery across the city, and wondered if Eleanor would be proud of the choices she'd made these past few days. "Paper," she said finally. Can I ask you something? Sure. Would you like to come live with me? Paper looked so shocked he actually stopped shivering for a moment. Live with you? For real? For real? Not as charity, as family. I know I can't ever replace your grandma. Maybe we can take care of each other. Paper searched her eye, looking for any sign that she didn't mean it, but all he saw there was sincerity and love. Are you sure? He asked. I don't know how to be part of a rich family. I don't know which fork to use. I don't have nice clothes. Victoria laughed, pulling him closer. Paper, do you think I care about any of that? You've taught me more about life in 3 days than I learned in 15 years of success. And could I still make origami? Not only could you have to. In fact, I have an idea. How about we start a program at the company? Art classes for underprivileged kids, using origami as therapy and creative expression. Paper's eyes lit up like stars. Really? I could teach other kids? You'd be the director of the program. Professor Paper, what do you think? Paper threw his arms around, hugging her with a strength she hadn't known he possessed. Love you, he whispered against her shoulder. Victoria felt her heart swell in a way it hadn't since childhood. I love you too, more than I ever thought possible. They stood together, Victoria holding his small hand tightly in hers. As they walked toward the car where James waited, Paper paused and looked back at his grandmother's headstone. Grandma, he whispered, I think I found my family. The wind carried his words through the snow, and Victoria swore she could feel the warm presence Rosa Martinez blessing as they began a journey neither of them could have imagined just a week before. 3 weeks after that day in the cemetery, Victoria was in her office trying to reorganize her life when Margaret came in carrying a dusty cardboard box that had been found in the basement during routine cleaning. The box was labeled in a handwriting she recognized instant for Victoria Ash, personal delivery, Eleanor Ash, 2009. Victoria felt her heart stop. Her mother had died in 2010, which meant this box had been left in the building a year before her death. How was it possible she'd never known it existed? Where exactly did you find it? Victoria asked, her hands trembling as she touched the yellowed label. In the sub-level storage, Margaret said. It was behind some old archive box. The custodian said it must have been sitting there for years. Forgot Paper, who had moved into Victoria's apartment the week before and now spent his afternoons in the office working on his origami, looked up from his makeshift table near the window. He had transformed that corner into a little sanctuary of art, with hundreds of colorful creations strung along invisible thread, turning the space into a paper garden that danced in the breeze from the air conditioner. Is it from your mom? He asked, approaching with quiet curiosity. Victoria nodded, unable to speak. Her hands hovered over the packing, sealing the box. 15 years after Eleanor's death, still wasn't ready for more surprises from the past. Do you want me to open it? Paper offered gently, sensing her hesitation. Victoria shook her head. No. I need to do this. Carefully cut the tape and lifted the flaps. What she found inside took her breath. There were dozens of letters addressed, each in her mother's elegant handwriting, old photographs of Victoria as a little girl, and at the very bottom of the box, wrapped in yellowed tissue paper, was something that made her whole world stop. It was an origami, perfect golden swan, so precise and graceful could have rivaled any of Paper's creation. Tied around its neck was a tiny note to my dear Victoria, who has always been my most beautiful swan. I learned this art to connect with you in a special way. With eternal love. Paper let out a soft, awed breath. Your mom made origami? Victoria took the swan in her shaking hand, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. I didn't know. She never told me. Paper examined the swan with the eyes of an expert. This is masterwork, he murmured. Look at these folds. The symmetry. She must have practiced for years. Victoria opened one of the letters, trembling finger. The date was March 2009, and her mother's handwriting danced across the page like visual music. My dear Victoria, if you're reading, it means you finally found this box. I left it in your building because I knew that one day when you were ready, you'd discover. I have cancer, sweetheart. The doctors have given me 6 months to a year. I don't want you to know yet because I know you'd drop everything to take care of, and I can't allow that. You have dreams to chase, an empire to build, but there's something I need you to know. For the past 2 years, I've been learning origami. Do you remember when you were little and we made paper airplanes together? You always said you wished they could fly forever. So I learned how to make paper birds that never fall, flowers that never wilt, hearts that never break. Every origami in this box was made thinking every fold carries my love. Every creation holds a memory. When I'm gone, I want you to remember my love for you will keep flying, just like the paper birds we... Victoria couldn't stop crying. Paper came closer and gently rested his hand on her shoulder. She knew, Victoria whispered. She She knew I'd need this someday. Paper picked up another letter and handed it to her. This one was more recent, December 2009. Victoria. Today, I went to St. Mary's and left a box of books for the children. I told Sister Catherine they were for someone special who would come looking for them someday. I can't explain it, but I'm certain those books will find their way to you through a child who needs love as much as you need to remember how to love. There was a boy there, a shy little one who makes origami from newspapers. He reminded me so much of you when you were small, creative, sensitive, a little lost in the world. His name is Paper. It's not his real name. That's what the other kids call him. I spent an hour when he showed me his creation. They're extraordinary. Victoria. There's a purity in his art that made me cry. I left a few of my origami with him and taught him some new techniques. He learned so quick, as if he already knew, as if this art was in his DNA. I have a feeling, my daughter, one day you and this boy will meet, and when you do, you will heal each other's wound. Victoria looked at Paper, who was reading over her shoulder, his eyes wide in shock. You met my mother. Victoria whisped. Paper nodded slowly, tears starting to spill down his cheeks too. I remember the kind lady who taught me how to make paper roses. She told me she had a daughter who'd forgotten how to dream. Victoria felt as though the universe had conspired to bring them together. Her mother had planted the seeds of their meeting years before she died, weaving an invisible web of connections that would one day lead them to each other. There's more, Paper said soft. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out an old origami, faded with time, little golden star. She gave me this and said to keep it until I met someone who needed hope. I always knew it was meant for you. Victoria took the star, feeling the weight of it settle into her palms like a living thing. Her mother had orchestrated everything. The books at the shelter, the meeting with Paper, even this small star that now rested in her hand. She planned it all, Victoria murmured. Awesome. Paper smiled through his tears. She said, real love always finds a way. Victoria opened more letters, each one revealing deeper layers of her mother's plan. Eleanor had anonymously donated money to St. Mary's for years, making sure Paper had a safe place to stay. She'd left specific instructions that her books be given to an artistic child who made origami. She'd even written a letter to Sister Catherine explaining that one day her daughter would come looking for a special child. She knew I would lose my... Victoria said, her voice raw with emotion. She knew I'd become cold and hardened, and she left you as my way back home. Paper knelt by Victoria's chair and took her hands in, and she left you as my family. She gave us to each other. Victoria pulled him into her arms, hugging him with an intensity that startled them both. In that moment, she fully understood her mother's plan. Eleanor had seen the future, a daughter lost in ambition and a boy lost in the world, and she had built a path to save each other. Paper, she whispered, do you want to know my mother's real name? What was it? Eleanor Rose Ash. Rose was her middle name. Paper was silent for a moment, then smiled. Like my grandma. Rose. A shiver ran down Victoria's spine. One more connect, another thread in the tapestry her mother had woven to bring them together. I think our grandmas met, Paper said soft, up in heaven, planning how to find us a family. Victoria laughed through her tears, picturing Eleanor and Rosa conspiring in the clan. Two women who loved fierce, crafting a miracle across time and space. Margaret, who had been watching it all in quiet respect, discreetly wiped her own eye. Miss Ash, she said gently, there's one last thing. Victoria looked down and saw an sealed with her name. Inside was a single sheet of and a small golden key. My dear Victoria, if you've come this far, it means you found your way back to love. This key opens a safe deposit box at National Bank, account number 7749. Inside, you'll find my true legacy for it. Not money, but memory. And at last gift, I hope you'll share with the special child who brought you back to me. With eternal love, Mom. Victoria looked up at Paper, then down at the key resting in her palm. Her mother still had one more surprise waiting. The National Bank of Manhattan was a temple of marble and bronze that had held the financial secrets of New York's most powerful families for over a century. Victoria and Paper walked through the imposing lobby, their footsteps echoing across the polished floor as they made their way to the private vault section. The golden key Eleanor had left behind felt as if it were burning in Victoria's palm, carrying the weight of 15 years of unanswered questions. Mr. Morrison, the bank manager, a distinguished man with silver hair who had known Victoria since she'd opened first corporate account, greeted them personally. His eyes softened when he saw Paper at her side, and Victoria realized that word of her transformation had spread even through the most conservative banking circle. Miss Ashford, Morrison said respectfully, it's an honor to help you access your mother's safe deposit box. I must say, Eleanor was one of the kindest clients we ever had, always so gracious, always thinking of others. They descended into the bank's lower level, where rows of stainless steel vaults held Manhattan's most precious treasure. Box 7749 was modest compared to the other, but as Victoria slipped the key into the lock and heard the soft click of it open, it felt as though she were unlocking not just a compartment of metal, but the last secrets of her mother's heart. Inside the box were 3 items that made Victoria and Paper gasp at the same time. The first was a red leather photo album stamped in gold, Victoria and Mom. The second was a blue velvet box that clearly contained jewelry, but it was the third item that left them both speechless. A giant origami as large as a newspaper, depicting a family tree made entirely out of golden paper with tiny human figures dangling from the branches like precious fruit. Paper stepped closer to the tree with reverence, his expert eyes studying intricate folds. "This must have taken months to make," he murmured. "Every figure is perfect. Every branch tells a story." Victoria picked up the photo album with trembling hands. The first pages showed her child, she and Eleanor making paper airplanes in the park, building sand castles on the beach, painting watercolors at the kitchen table. But as she turned the page, Victoria could see her own transformation, the creative, smiling little girl, slowly becoming a serious teenager, then a young woman consumed by her drive for success. "Look," Paper said soft, pointing to one of the figures on the tree. It was a tiny paper ballerina with long hair and a bright smile. "This is you when you were little." Victoria studied the figure more closely and saw her mother had written tiny words along the folds of the ballerina's dress. "Dream, art, pure heart." "And this one," Paper continued, pointing to another figure on the same branch. "I think this is me." It was a small boy holding what looked like a paper bird. On the folds of his shirt were the words, "Keeper of Dream, Bridge to Love." Victoria felt tears slip down her cheek. Her mother hadn't only foreseen her meeting Paper, she had created an artistic representation of their shared destiny years before either of them had ever met. "There are more figures," Paper said, studying the tree. "Look up here." He pointed to the top, where 2 female figures stood holding hands. One had gray hair and a serene smile, clearly Eleanor. The other had dark hair and kind eyes. "My grandma," Paper whispered. "She put my grandma on the tree." Victoria opened the velvet box and found not expensive jewel, but something infinitely more precious. Small silver origami, each representing a special moment from her childhood. Paper ice cream cone to remember their summers in the park. Tiny paper house to represent her first doll, a miniature book, every bedtime story Eleanor ever read to her. "She turned all our memories into art," Victoria murmured in one. At the bottom of the box lay one last letter, sealed in red wax. Victoria opened it carefully, revealing her mother's familiar handwriting. "My dear Victoria, if you're reading this with Paper at your side, it means my plan worked perfect. You found each other, and more important, you found your way back to love. I want you to know that Rosa and I met at the hospital during she was visiting a friend, and I was going through chemo. We spent many afternoons talking about the two of you. She spoke of her gifted grandson, who turned scraps into beauty. I spoke of my ambitious daughter, who had forgotten how to create beauty at all. Rosa taught me advanced origami technique, and I helped her write letters to Paper that she never had the courage to send. Together, we came up with a plan. If anything happened, you would have each other. The family tree I left in this vault isn't just art, it's a map. Each figure represents someone who needs love in their lives. There are children at St. Mary, elders in nursing, lonely souls all over New York who need what you can offer together. My final wish is that you use your gift, your generous heart, Victoria, and your magical art, Paper, to build a bigger family, not just for the two of you, but for everyone who needs to remember they are not alone in this world. Endless love and infinite pride. Eleanor P.S. Paper, there's something special for you on the last page of the album. Paper flipped quickly to the final, and his breath caught in a sob. There was a photo of him at age 8, sitting on his grandma Rosa's lap, both of them beaming as they held up their origami creation. But what surprised him most was seeing Eleanor in the photo too, seated beside them in a hospital chair, her eyes shining with joy as she watched Paper teach Rosa a new folding. "They were friends," Paper whispered. "Our grandmas were really friends." Victoria pulled him into her arm, and they both cried, tears of joy and relief. The puzzle was finally complete. Their mothers hadn't just planned their meet, they had built a friendship founded on the love they felt for their children, creating a bridge between two worlds that had once seemed impossible to connect. Paper Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. Do you want to know what I think we should do? What? We should start exactly where our mothers wanted. Let's go back to St. Mary's and build that art program we talked about. Not just origami, painting, sculpture, music, dance. A place where kids can turn pain into beauty, just like you did. Paper smiled, the brightest smile Victoria had ever seen on his face. And we can call it the Eleanor Rosa program. Perfect. Victoria agreed, feeling a peace she hadn't known since she was a little girl. They spent another hour in the vault, studying every detail of the family tree and identifying the figures representing children Eleanor and Rosa had known at the shelter. It was literally a map of hearts in need of healing, plan disguised as art. When they finally stepped back into the cold evening, the sun was setting over Manhattan, painting the skyscrapers in golden light that reminded them of Eleanor's origami paper. Victoria and Paper walked hand in hand along Fifth Avenue, not a millionaire and a street boy anymore, but a family created by a love that transcended time and death. Victoria, Paper said as they reached the spot where they'd first met, "Can I make you a special origami?" Of course. Paper took a sheet of golden paper from his pocket, a gift Eleanor had left just for this moment, and began folding it in movements that looked almost like a dance. In just a few minutes, he had created two intertwined figures, a woman and a boy, holding hands, with wings suggesting that together they could fly. "For our new family," he said, offering the creation to Victoria. Victoria accepted the origami, feeling the symbolic weight of the gift. "For our new family," she repeated, knowing her life had finally found its true purpose. 6 months after the day at the cemetery that changed their lives forever, Victoria and Paper stood in the main hall of St. Mary, watching a transformation that surpassed even their most ambitious dream. What had once been a stark room, healing walls, and donated furniture had become a true sanctuary of creativity. Vibrant murals covered every wall, art tables filled the center of the room, and hundreds of origami creations hung from the ceiling, forming a paper sky that danced softly in the breeze coming through the open window. The Eleanor Rosa program had become much more than just an art project. It was a movement, a quiet revolution, transforming not only the children at the shelter, but the entire surrounding community. 23 kids now attended classes regularly, each discovering their own unique way of turning pain into beauty. Professor Paper called Sophia, a 9-year-old girl who had arrived at the shelter 3 months earlier, still haunted years of family neglect. "I finished the swan you taught." Paper walked over to the table where Sophia was working, his eyes glowing with pride as he saw the delicate creation in her small hand. The swan wasn't technically perfect. One wing was slightly crooked and the neck had an extra fold, but it was absolutely beautiful in its human imperfection. "It's magnificent," so Paper said, his voice full of sincere admiration. "See how you put your own personality into the folds? That's what makes your art special." Victoria watched from her makeshift desk in the corner of the room, where she worked on financial reports for the program in between classes. Over the past 6 months, she had learned to balance her corporate life with her new passion for philanthropy, discovering that it was possible to be successful in business and still hold on to her humanity. Ashford Properties hadn't just survived the media storm of the previous year. It had thrived in ways she never imagined. Victoria's decision to choose principles over profit had attracted a new kind of investor, people who valued social responsibility as much as financial return. The company had become a model of conscious capital, proving it was possible to do well by doing good. Miss Victoria, called Marcus, an 11-year-old boy who had taken to sculpting clay figures. "Can I show you what I made for my mom?" Marcus had come to St. Mary's after his mother, who struggled with addiction, was arrested for theft. For months, he had refused to talk about it, carrying a rage that seemed to consume his small heart. But through art, he had found a way to process his complex feelings about love, abandonment, and forgiveness. The sculpture he held was a simple female figure, but powerful in its emotion. The woman's arms were outstretched, as if offering a hug, and her face carried a mixture of sadness and hope that perfectly captured the complexity of Marcus's feelings. "It's beautiful, Mark," Victoria said, gently touching his shoulder. "Your mom would be so proud." "Do you think she can change?" Marcus asked, his small voice weight heartbreaking vulnerability. "Like you did." The question struck Victoria like light. In the past month, her story had become legend among the kids at the shelter. The cold millionaire who had rediscovered her heart through loving an abandoned child. To them, she was living proof that people could change, that it was never too late to love over fear. "I believe anyone can change, Marcus," Victoria replied, kneeling to look him in the eye. "Sometimes we just need someone to believe in us first." Marcus nodded, hugging his sculpture to his chest. "Then I'm going to believe in my mom and make art for her until she comes back." Paper came over, listening to their conversation. "You know what we can do?" Marcus, we can create a special gallery here at the shelter, place to display all the pieces you make for your mom. That way, when she's ready to see them, they'll be waiting. Marcus's eyes lit up. Gallery just for her? A gallery just for her, Paper confirmed, smiling. Victoria watched, her heart full. Paper had become an extraordinary teacher, able to find exactly the right words to heal wounded hearts. His own journey through abandoned rediscovery had given him an emotional wisdom far beyond his 13 years. Sister Catherine walked over, carrying a stack of letters. Victoria, Paper, more requests have come in. 3 shelters from other states want to start similar programs, and there's a school in Los Angeles interested in having you come speak. The success of the Eleanor Rosa program had spread far beyond New York. Articles in national magazines, TV documentaries, and word of mouth had turned their little local initiative into a nationwide movement. Vulnerable children all across the country were discovering the transformative power of art, thanks to the example Victoria and Paper. What do you all think? Victoria asked the children gathered in the hall. Should we take our program to other cities? A chorus of enthusiastic "yeah" echoed through the space, followed by clapping and laughter. These children, who had arrived at the shelter broken and hoped, now radiated confidence and joy. They had become ambassadors of their own transformation, living proof that love and art could heal even the deepest wound. Then that's what we'll do, Victoria announced. We'll bring the magic we've created here to kids all over the country. Paper climbed onto a chair to address the group. But remember, he said, his small voice clear and steady, no matter where we go or how many people we help, this place will always be our home. This is where everything started. The children applauded again, and Victoria felt tears of happiness slipping down her cheek. She looked around the room at the colorful murals, the origami sky, and the radiant faces of the children who had become her extended family, and realized she had found something no amount of money could ever buy: a true purpose. That night, after all the children had gone to bed, Victoria and Paper sat together in the small garden behind the shelter that they had helped plant. It was a simple space, with modest flowers and a donated wooden bed, but to them, it was perfect. It was their special place to talk about the day, dream about the future, and simply be together as a family. Paper, Victoria said, watching the first stars appear in the dark New York sky. Do you ever regret how our lives changed? Paper thought for a moment, playing with an origami star he'd made during the day, a little golden star that glimmered in the moonlight. Sometimes I miss how simple it was when it was just me and my origami on the street, he admitted. But then I think about all the kids we've helped, how you smile now, how our family has grown, and I know we're exactly where we're meant to be. Victoria smiled, pulling him closer. Your grandma and my mom would be so proud of. I think they are proud, Paper said, pointing up at the sky. Sometimes, when I'm folding origami, I feel like they're here, guiding my hand. Victoria looked up, imagining Eleanor and Rosa watching them start, smiling as they saw how their impossible plan had turned into a beautiful reality. 2 women who had met in their pain had built a bridge of love that connected not only Victoria and Paper, but hundreds of children who now had hope where there had once been only despair. Paper, Victoria said soft, thank you for saving. Thank you for letting me save, Paper replied, handing her the golden star he had made. Victoria took the gift, adding it to the growing collection of origami pieces Paper gave her regularly. Each one was a reminder of a special moment, a tangible symbol of the love they had built together. As they got ready to go inside and join the children for bedtime story, a tradition where each child shared something good that had happened that day, Victoria knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home. It wasn't a place, it was a feeling, the sense of belonging, of being unconditionally loved, of having a purpose far greater than herself. 2 years after the day Victoria Ashford first stopped to watch a boy folding origami on 5th Avenue, she stood on the stage of Lincoln Center, facing an audience of 1,000 people who had gathered for the first annual Eleanor Rosa Gala. The event had become the most anticipated night on New York's philanthropic calendar, not just for the prestige of the guests, but for the genuine emotion that filled every moment. Paper, now 15 years old and officially adopted as Peter Ash, stood beside her on stage. He was no longer the shy, frightened boy she had met on a cold December morning. He had grown taller and more confident, but still carried the same kindness in his eye and the same magic in his hands whenever he created art. Dressed in an elegant tuxedo, he had insisted on customizing himself with small golden origami pinned to the lapel. He radiated a natural dignity that made the guests lean in to hear him. 2 years ago, Victoria began, her voice resonating through the silent auditorium. I was a woman who had forgotten how to draw. I had everything money could buy, but I had lost the one thing that truly mattered: the ability to love without condition. The audience was completely captivated. Among the attendees were CEOs of major corporations, celebrities, politicians, and philanthropists. There was something unprecedented that night. 50 children from the Eleanor Rosa program, dressed in their finest clothes, sitting in the front rows as guests of honor. It was the first time in Lincoln Center's history that children from shelters occupied the most prestigious seats in the theater. Peter taught me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars. Victoria continued, looking fondly at her adoptive son. But in lives touched, hearts healed, and dreams restored. Peter stepped up to the mic, and the room grew even quiet. His presence was magnetic, not because of pomp or spectacle, but because of the pure authenticity that flowed through every word he spoke. When I met Victoria, Peter began, his voice clear and steady, I was folding origami from old news because it was the only way I knew how to make something beautiful in a world that seemed so ugly. I didn't know I was about to find not just a mother, but a part in the most important mission of our lives. He paused, pulling from his pocket a special origami he had made for the occasion, a golden phoenix shimmering in the stage lights. This phoenix represents all the children who have come through our program, Peter explained, lifting the piece so everyone could see. Kids who arrived broke like ashes of dreams that seemed gone forever. We've discovered love, patience, and art. Those ashes can transform into something more beautiful than we ever imagined. The audience erupted in applause, but Peter lifted his hand gently, signaling there was more he wanted to share. Tonight, he went on, exchanging a meaningful look with Victoria. I'm honored to announce something special. The Eleanor Rosa program is expanding internationally. Next year, we'll be opening therapeutic art centers in 10 countries, starting with orphanages in Brazil, Mexico, and the Philippines. The reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. Applause echoed through the theater, but what mattered most to Victoria and Peter were the tears in the eyes of the children in the front row. They knew their story was inspiring real change in the world. Victoria stepped back to the mic, her voice thick with emotion. But international expansion is only the beginning. Peter and I have decided to create something even more ambitious. The Eleanor Rosa Foundation for Transformative Family. She paused, letting the weight of the announcement settle over the audience. The foundation will connect adults who, like me, lost their way with children who, like Peter, need love and guidance. It won't just be about traditional adoption. It will be about creating families built on shared purpose, mutual healing, and growing together. Peter smiled and added, because we've learned that sometimes the person being saved and the one doing the saving are the same, just at different points on the journey. The audience rose to their feet in an ovation that lasted several minutes, but the most moving moment of the night was still to come. And now, Victoria said, as the applause faded, we'd like to invite some of the children from our program to share their own story. One by one, 5 children walked onto the stage. Sophia, now 11, spoke about how folding origami had helped her process the trauma of abandonment. Marcus, who had become a talented sculptor, shared that his mother had recovered from addiction and that they were rebuilding their relation through the art he made. Each story was a testament to the transformative power of love and creativity. But it was the last child, a little 8-year-old girl named Luna, who had joined the program only 3 months before, who left the audience in tears. She held a simple origami, a red heart made from recycled gift. Before I met Professor Peter and Miss Victoria, Luna said in her small but steady voice, I thought I was trash, like the paper people throw away, but they taught me that even the most crumpled paper can turn into something beautiful. Someone cares. Victoria felt tears stream down her cheek. That little girl had captured in a single sentence everything she and Peter had learned, that there are no disposable people, only people who haven't yet found someone to see them as the treasure they truly are. When the event ended, Victoria and Peter slipped away to the garden behind Lincoln Center, looking up at the stars shining over Manhattan. The city buzzed around them with its familiar nighttime energy, but they were in their own quiet world. Gratitude and Mom, Peter said. He had started calling her that 6 months after the adoption, and the word still made Victoria's heart leap with joy. Do you think our grandmothers knew it would lead to all this? Victoria smiled, thinking of Eleanor and Rosa, 2 women who had planted seeds of love that were now blooming into gardens across the world. I think they knew exactly what they were doing when they brought us together. They knew that together we'd be stronger than we ever could be alone. Peter reached into his pocket and pulled out an origami he'd made during the event. 2 golden figures holding hands, their wings suggesting that together they could fly anywhere. For our next event, he said, offering offering it to Victoria. Victoria accepted the gift, adding it to the collection that now filled an entire room in her home. Hundreds of origami pieces telling the story of their journey together, every fold infused with memory and love. "For our next adventure," she repeated, knowing that no matter where life took them, they would face everything together as a family. As they walked home through the bright streets of New York City, Victoria reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a simple decision: stop and truly see a child the world had rendered invisible. She had lost an empire of concrete and steel, but she had gained a kingdom of transformed hearts and restored lives. The Eleanor Rosa program now served over 500 children in 12 states. Ashford Properties had become a model of social responsibility. And most important of all, Victoria had discovered that the greatest legacy she could leave the world wasn't buildings or money. It was a network of love that would keep growing long after she was gone. "Peter," she said when they reached home, "thank you for teaching me that it's never too late to start over. Thank you for showing me that family isn't about blood, it's about choice," Peter replied, hugging her tight. And so, under the starry New York sky, a millionaire who had rediscovered her heart and a boy who had transformed pain into art continued writing a love. Proved miracles still happen. Brave people choose to see the humanity in each other.